take the world.
In 2019, Brightburn the movie arrived in theaters with a well-documented but killer premise of what if a baby from another world crashed on a Kansas farm and grew up evil instead of good. The story follows Brandon Breyer, an alien child raised by a kindly couple in the rural town of Brightburn, Kansas. If you have even a passing knowledge of Superman, you'd know that even he crashed in Kansas, albeit the town was Smallville instead of Brightburn. Anyway, for 12 years, Brandon seems like an ordinary, though socially awkward kid, but once his mysterious spaceship calls out to him, he develops superhuman powers. But that was not all. With his superpowers came a severely sinister change in attitude. Instead of learning truth, justice, and the so-called American way of a certain man named Clark Kent, Brandon embraces a much darker destiny. He terrorizes his town and even his own loving parents, and to do this, he employs all his little tricks like heat vision, super strength, and flight, often to ensure deadly ends for those around him. In short, Brightburn basically inverts the Superman origin story into a supervillain horror tale. To say the least, it's a bold, high-concept idea that marries comic book lore with gory slasher film tropes, and throws this awkward and unlikely couple in a sleepy Midwestern town. Despite its outlandish concept, the film itself was quite modest in scale. Running just 90 minutes on a budget reportedly between $6 and $12 million, Brightburn didn't have the polish or scope of a typical superhero blockbuster, but more importantly, it didn't even need one. It plays out more like a tense B-movie thriller than a grand comic book epic. Audiences expecting an X-Men or Marvel-level spectacle were instead treated to an intimate and very violent small-town horror story in the town of Brightburn, where the movie is set. Of course, like Smallville, Brightburn is also fictional in nature, but it has an oh-so-typical Kansas thing going around. Needless to say, Brightburn becomes the isolated area for Brandon's reign of terror and carnage. He picks off people who cross him one by one. For instance, a classmate's mom, his own uncle, the local sheriff, even his poor adoptive dad. And the scenes where these things happen feel nothing less than a creepy kid horror movie, only with superpowers in the mix. By the film's fiery finale, Brandon has all but embraced his alien ship's command to take the world, leaving a trail of death, destruction, and devastation, including deliberately downing a plane to cover up his dastardly crimes. Released in May 2019, Brightburn arrived when the superhero movie fever was in its full swing, and it was unique because of its R-rated take on the usual hopeful hero fare. Critics and audiences were intrigued by this twisted mirror image of Superman. But when the dust settled and the bodies piled up, many felt the movie never fully delivered on its promise. To understand why, let's break down the hype, the misleading marketing, and the behind-the-scenes fumbles that led Brightburn to burn out instead of shine. Oh, and if you liked the video, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos. And now, let's continue. One of the biggest reasons Brightburn drew attention was because of this one name that was splashed across all the marketing: James Gunn. Coming off the popularity of Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, Sony's marketing made it look like Brightburn was a James Gunn film through and through. Trailers and posters shouted the words "from the visionary filmmaker of Guardians of the Galaxy" to hype this movie. But in reality, James Gunn didn't actually write or direct Brightburn at all. He was only a producer. In reality, the screenplay was written by Brian Gunn and Mark Gunn, James's brother and cousin, and it was directed by David Yarovesky. But unless you read the fine print, you'd assume James Gunn himself was creatively involved in this Superman from Hell story. Needless to say, this whole bait-and-switch thing was absolutely intentional, as well as misleading, like so many YouTube videos out there. But then I shouldn't accuse small creators on YouTube when movies like Infinity Wars and Endgame also lie to us. For instance, in the Infinity War trailer, there was a scene where the heroes charge through the Wakandan jungles with Banner in his Hulk form, but that never happens in the movie, and we see Banner in his Hulkbuster suit charging on a different terrain. In Avengers Endgame, the trailers hide the fact that Cap is wielding a broken shield. So yeah, Sony too leaned a lot into Gunn's name. After all, he had a loyal fan base and a reputation for edgy, humorous takes on superheroes and alien monsters. Take Slither, for instance. By plastering James Gunn's Brightburn everywhere, the studio was intentionally cashing in on his popularity. In fact, check out this poster here. So this poster, as well as the official synopsis, even explicitly billed the movie as the visionary filmmaker of Guardians presents a subversive take on a new genre. It's easy to see why most of the audiences walked in expecting Gunn's signature style and wit. Imagine the audience's surprise, or rather shock, when they discovered that James Gunn's creative input in the film was little to none. Yes, he helped get the project made. It was produced under his company and financed by indie outfit The H Collective, but Brightburn is creatively Yarovesky's film. Gunn's influence is mostly indirect, like hiring his relatives as writers, maybe giving a few notes, and sneaking a couple of his friends into cameo roles. There's little of Gunn's trademark humor or heart in the final product. In hindsight, the marketing did Brightburn no favors by overselling Gunn's involvement. It created false expectations, leading some moviegoers to feel duped. The trailers for Brightburn were undeniably intriguing. They set the film up as a major deconstruction of the superhero mythos and made the movie seem like Demon in Steel. In glossy, tightly edited previews, we saw a spaceship crash, a child discovering powers, horrific shots of Brandon in a cape and creepy mask that seemed more scarecrow than hero, and of course, the carnage was the glue that held it all together to make the trailer itself a full-blown supervillain origin story. However, when fans finally watched Brightburn, many realized that all the best bits had already been in those trailers. The movie itself was a much smaller and more straightforward horror film than the grand concept Sony had previously advertised. In fact, Brightburn's marketing campaign gave away nearly every major moment, from Brandon's disturbing classroom incident to the gory fates of several characters. And since there were hardly any surprises in the movie, some found it to be 100% less fun. If you saw Brandon don his red mask and obliterate a fluorescent light while stalking someone in the preview, well, you essentially saw the highlight of that entire sequence. So why was Brightburn made to look like an intense and action-packed big-budget superhero movie, while the reality was entirely different? Well, one must remember that Brightburn is, above all, a low-budget horror movie at its core, more in line with a creepy child slasher than a sweeping supervillain epic. It couldn't possibly deliver the kind of large-scale battles or complex myth-building that the concept implies. The film focuses almost exclusively on Brandon's immediate circle and a handful of set-piece scenes that range from a diner massacre here to a farmhouse massacre there. There were no secret layers to the story beyond what the teaser already spelled out, and no deeper exploration of Brandon's alien origins. No clever twists on superhero tropes beyond the central evil Superman trope. In essence, the trailers sold a much more ambitious film than what was delivered, and this hurt the movie's word-of-mouth marketing, which is probably the biggest marketing achievement a movie can potentially receive. In fact, Brightburn's road to release hit a bizarre snag in 2018, a few months before its release. Sony had originally planned to unveil the film in a big way at San Diego Comic-Con 2018, which was an ideal stage to show off a secret James Gunn horror project to the world. A panel was set, buzz was building, and then, at the last minute, disaster struck in the form of a very real controversy. In July 2018, mere days before SDCC, The Guardians of the Galaxy director was very publicly fired by Disney from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 over some offensive old tweets that had resurfaced. I mean, he did say some really weird stuff about many things, including rape, where he was like, the good thing about getting done being raped is that you realize it's not happening any longer. Yikes. And so Gunn suddenly went from Marvel's Golden Boy to persona non grata, and Brightburn's Comic-Con debut was quietly cancelled. In Gunn's defense, though, he publicly apologized for his crude sense of humor back in the day, and not just once, he seemed to feel really guilty about the whole thing. And he should have been, especially after the whole Jeffrey Epstein controversy, which, by the way, still hasn't quite become the ghost of Christmas past. Anyway, Gunn's planned appearance to promote Brightburn was cancelled abruptly. This last-minute yanking of Brightburn from Comic-Con created an air of mystery around the project. At the time, Brightburn had only been known as an untitled James Gunn horror project, and now it was even more shrouded in secrecy. Fans, as well as pop culture media outlets, were left to think what really was up with this project. And naturally, conspiracy theories and curiosity bloomed. Some speculated Sony wanted to avoid associating with Gunn's Twitter scandal, while others thought Disney's move had indirectly made Brightburn a forbidden project that was too hot for Comic-Con. In any case, the lack of a Comic-Con reveal only amplified intrigue among genre fans. By the time the first trailer finally dropped online months later in December of 2018, anticipation was high. The hush-hush rollout and the Gunn controversy had inadvertently built unrealistic expectations that Brightburn might be some game-changing, edgy masterpiece the studios didn't want you to see. Of course, in retrospect, all that mystique was a double-edged sword. On one hand, the Comic-Con no-show gave Brightburn a sort of underground buzz, making it feel like a special secret project for horror and comic fans. On the other hand, by the time it opened in May 2019, audiences were expecting something perhaps more provocative or boundary-pushing than what they got. One of the clearest reasons Brightburn stumbled like a three-legged cat is the gulf between its budget and the audience's expectations. The film was made for peanuts in a world where even mid-tier superhero films cost 10 times that. This tiny budget meant the story had to stay connected to just a few locations, like a farmhouse, a diner, and a school. There was a small cast, and only brief bursts of effects-heavy action. For a horror movie, $6 to $12 million is par for the course. For a Superman-level concept, it's minuscule. In fact, one Forbes reviewer put it this way: Brightburn was a big-budget idea trapped in a very low-budget genre execution, and they could not be more right. Think about what audiences likely imagined from the premise. The idea of an evil Superman clone conjures images of global scale, kind of like a demigod laying waste to cities or facing off against military forces. The marketing certainly hinted at something grander lurking beneath the surface, but Brightburn simply couldn't afford that scale. For example, rather than showing Brandon wreaking havoc on a metropolis, the climax has him hounding his mother through their farmhouse and causing a single plane crash, conveniently off-screen to cover his tracks. What could have been an apocalyptic fight sequence is instead a brief personal confrontation followed by a news montage. The scope stays narrow because it had to, and the film had no room for armies or superheroes or superdogs coming to save the day. This mismatch between marketing-fueled expectations and the film's reality led many to feel underwhelmed. Opening weekend numbers were decent, around $7 to $8 million in the US, and ultimately, Brightburn did earn about $33 million worldwide, which on paper is a profitable return on such a low budget. So it wasn't a financial disaster. However, by superhero movie standards, those grosses were a drop in the bucket, and even as a horror release, it didn't break out beyond a niche audience. So yeah, the film technically made money, but left a lot of opportunity on the table, given how easily the concept could have gone viral with stronger word of mouth. Critically, the consensus was that the movie's ambitious concept wasn't fully realized, largely due to the constrained, simplistic execution. Reviewers wished the script had dug deeper into Brandon's alien origins, or given him more of a personality beyond evil kid with powers. But fleshing out those elements might have required a bigger scale and budget. As it stands, Brightburn sticks to a straightforward horror formula. It delivers some thrills and a blend of genres, but it never becomes the radical superhero deconstruction that the trailers and our imaginations promised. If you left Brightburn when the credits started rolling, you'd miss one of the film's ballsiest things that Brightburn attempted. I'm talking about the mid-credits sequence that teases a wider Brightburn universe. In these brief clips, a conspiracy theorist talk show host, played with manic gusto by Michael Rooker, rattles off sightings of other superpowered beings causing havoc, much like Brandon did in Brightburn. He mentions a half-man, half-sea creature that has been terrorizing the oceans, and a powerful witch strangling people with a rope, who are nothing but obvious evil doppelgangers of Aquaman and Wonder Woman. There's even a quick reference to an alien hero turned vigilante, which was a reference to Crimson Bolt from James Gunn's own 2010 dark superhero comedy, Super. This was essentially Brightburn teasing its sinister Justice League, while implying that Brandon is just one of several supervillains about to plague the world. In 2023, the H Collective, the production company behind Brightburn, announced it was developing a sequel after all, under a new banner called H3 Entertainment. The twist? H3 claimed it would integrate trendy tech like the metaverse, Web3, and even artificial intelligence into its projects, including Brightburn 2. This raised a lot of eyebrows. In an era where Hollywood was literally in turmoil over the use of AI, with writers and actors striking against such technologies, the idea that a Brightburn sequel might be created with AI involvement sounded, to many fans, like a bad joke. H3's founders hastily clarified that new tech would be used to enhance and complement, not replace, creative professionals. But the damage was done, and the sequel news became more of a punchline than anything else. Finally, the nail in the coffin came from James Gunn himself. Now co-CEO of DC Studios, which is ironic given Brightburn's Superman-shaded concept, the director addressed the sequel talks directly in 2024. When a fan asked for an update, he replied that, yes, talks happened early on, but the rights are all effed up. I only own half, so it's unlikely it will ever happen. In plainer terms, Brightburn's character rights are split. Gunn's camp owns part of the IP, and the H Collective owns the other part, and this entanglement makes any sequel a legal quagmire. He also indicated that there are no plans at all for Brightburn 2 right now. Considering his focus is entirely on the DC universe through at least 2026, it's hard to imagine him spearheading a Brightburn follow-up even if the rights issues were resolved. All of this means that the evil Justice League we saw on screen is probably never coming. Marvelous verdict. As of now, Brightburn's legacy is that of a one-off twist on a classic tale, a film that asked, what if Superman were evil, and answered it with a B-movie. Any dreams of an extended Brightburn universe have fizzled amid legal tangles and misguided ventures. Perhaps it's for the best. Sometimes a great idea is best contained in a single, sharp shock of a movie. And Brightburn certainly gave us that. A jolting, gruesome ride that simultaneously thrills and makes you lament the unrealized potential. In the end, we're left to imagine the even crazier places a sequel might have gone, while Brandon Breyer's exploits live on as a dark little parable of power without conscience, the nightmare version of the superhero next door. Well, that was all in this one, guys. See you around. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.